There comes a point where you stop calling it coincidence. Different faces, different personalities, different situations, but the same outcome. You connect with someone, things feel promising at first, then distance appears. Mixed signals, inconsistency, emotional walls you can't break through. The final siren. And you're left asking the same question again. Why does this keep happening? This isn't about blaming yourself or assuming something is wrong with you. It's about understanding that attraction is not random. The people you're drawn to and the people who are drawn to you often reflect something deeper happening internally. This pattern shows up across all ages and genders. Whether you're in your early 20s trying to understand relationships for the first time, or later in life reflecting on years of repeated experiences, the root is often the same. There's something familiar about emotional unavailability that your system recognizes. Why emotional unavailability can feel familiar instead of frustrating. Most people assume they want consistency, openness, and emotional presence. And, on a conscious level, that's true. But attraction doesn't operate only at the conscious level. If you grew up around inconsistency, distance, or emotional unpredictability, your system learned to associate that with connection. Not because it was healthy, but simply because it was familiar. So, when you meet someone who is emotionally unavailable, distant, hard to read, inconsistent, it doesn't immediately feel wrong. It feels known. That familiarity can be mistaken for chemistry. This is why you can meet someone stable and emotionally available, and instead of feeling drawn in, you feel bored or disconnected. It's not because they lack value. It's because your system isn't used to that kind of dynamic. How your own emotional patterns play a role. Attraction is not just about who the other person is. It's also about what you bring into the interaction. If you struggle with vulnerability, even subtly, you may be drawn to people who don't require it. Someone emotionally unavailable allows you to stay somewhat guarded while still being in a connection. If you have a fear of abandonment, you may become more invested in someone who is inconsistent, constantly trying to earn their attention or approval. If you've learned to equate love with effort or struggle, you may feel more attached when the relationship feels uncertain rather than stable. These patterns are not always obvious. They operate beneath the surface, shaping your choices without you even realizing it. The role of validation and, chasing what feels out of reach. Emotionally unavailable people often create a dynamic where their attention feels limited or inconsistent, and that inconsistency can, become addictive. When someone is fully available, there's really no question about where you stand. But when someone is distant, every small sign of attention feels, significant. A message, a moment of closeness, a brief period of consistency, it all feels amplified. This can pull you into a cycle where you're not just connecting with the person, but chasing the feeling of being chosen by them. This dynamic affects people of all ages. Younger individuals may experience it as intense emotional highs and lows, Older individuals may recognize the pattern, but, still feel pulled into it because of how deeply it's wired. Why you may overlook red flags early on. Emotionally unavailable people rarely present themselves that way at the beginning. There's often enough interest, enough attention, and enough connection to create momentum. But, there are usually early signs: inconsistency in communication, avoidance of deeper conversations, hesitation around commitment, a pattern of being present one moment and distant the next. These signs are, easy to dismiss when you're emotionally invested. You may tell yourself they just need time, or that things will become clearer as the relationship develops. But what often happens is, really the opposite. The more invested you become, the more their unavailability affects you. How this pattern repeats across different stages of life. This dynamic doesn't disappear with age. It evolves. In earlier years, it may look like intense but unstable relationships. In midlife, it can show up as repeated connections that never fully develop. Later on, it may become a quiet pattern of, avoiding deeper intimacy altogether. The external details change, but the internal mechanism remains the same until it's addressed. That's why, awareness matters more than age or experience. What it takes to break the pattern. Breaking this pattern doesn't start with finding a different type of person. It starts with, understanding your own responses to connection. Pay attention to what you feel drawn to. Not just who the person is, but how they make you feel. Is it calm and stable, or uncertain and intense? Notice how you respond to availability. Do you feel comfortable when someone is consistent, or do you, lose interest? Another step is learning to recognize early signs without immediately overriding them. If someone shows consistent emotional distance, take that at face value instead of trying to interpret or fix it. It's also important, to build your own emotional availability. The more comfortable you are with openness, communication, and stability, the more natural it becomes to seek that in others. The difference between chemistry and alignment can be quite profound. One of the biggest shifts you can make, honestly, is understanding that chemistry is not always a reliable indicator of compatibility. Chemistry can come from familiarity, even when that familiarity is, rooted in unhealthy patterns. Alignment, on the other hand, comes from shared values, mutual effort, and emotional presence. It may not feel as intense at first, but it creates something more stable and sustainable over time. Learning to distinguish between the two can, honestly, change the way you approach relationships entirely. Closing. Attracting emotionally unavailable people is not a sign that you're destined for difficult relationships. It's a signal. It's really a signal, that there are patterns worth understanding, responses worth examining, and, parts of yourself that are asking for attention. Once you start recognizing those patterns, you actually gain the ability to change them. And when that happens, the type of connections you experience begins to change as well. If this gave you clarity, do consider subscribing and perhaps share this with someone who keeps finding themselves in the same kind of relationship without understanding why.